Hello and welcome to Harrogate and Headlines Winter Thriller Virtual Panel. I'm your chair, Lauren North, and I'm delighted to be here talking to three fantastic authors on The Price of Life. How far would you go to get what you want? Before we dive in, let's go and meet our panelists and get to know their books. First up, the very talented Allie Reynolds. Allie is an ex-snowboarder who, after competing in the British Snowboarding Championships and being in the UK top 10, has turned her talents to writing. Her first novel, Shiver, is out in January 2021. Allie, do you want to tell us a little bit about your debut?
Shiver begins as 5 former friends are invited to a reunion in a tiny French ski resort. 10 years ago, they were athletes living and training in the resort until tragedy struck. So now it's the off season and the reunion venue is high up on an isolated mountaintop. As they go up the cable car, there's confusion over who invited them. When they reach the top, the ski lodge there is dark and deserted. An icebreaker game has been laid out for them. The game reveals their darkest secrets, but the cable car is no longer running. There's no easy way down. If they want to get off the mountain alive, they must find the truth of what really happened that winter 10 years ago.
Oh, amazing and fantastic pitch. So moving on to Harriet, the phenomenal Harriet Tyce. After working as a criminal barrister for over 10 years, Harriet certainly knows her criminal mindset. Harriet's debut novel, Blood Orange, was a Sunday Times bestseller and a Richard and Judy book club pick. Her second novel, The Lies You Told, came out in the summer. Harriet, do you want to tell us a little bit about The Lies You Told?
Here it is. Yes, it's about a woman who has to move back to London with her daughter, and her daughter starts at a new school. The tension in the playground between the children is pretty bad, but it's nothing as to the toxicities of the parents at the school gate. And the question for Sadie, the mum, and Matilda, the daughter, is just how dangerous it's going to become for them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And last but by no means least is Simon Kernick, who really needs no introduction. Simon is one of the UK's most popular thriller writers. He's also been chosen as a Richard and Judy summer read, as well as reaching the dizzying heights of #1 in the UK charts on multiple occasions. His latest novel, Kill a Stranger, is out on the 26th of November. Simon, welcome to the panel. Could you tell us a little bit about Kill a Stranger?
I can. I'm going to have to show you a photograph on my phone of the cover because because it hasn't actually arrived yet. I guess today, but the book is next week. But effectively, it's a very, very fast-paced story which begins with one of our three protagonists, Matt. He arrives home from a night out in London to find that his pregnant fiance is missing, and there is a dead woman who he has no idea who she is, lying in a bed where his fiance Kate should be. The dead woman he doesn't recognize. She has a phone in her hand. A couple of minutes later, the phone starts ringing. He finds out that Kate has been kidnapped, and in order to get her back, he has to kill someone. He doesn't know who this person is. He's going to get a tiny little piece of information, but he knows that that person has to die by midday the next day, or his fiance dies. So it's as simple as that. And really, we see the whole story over that 24 hours from the three central protagonists' points of view. But it becomes clear as the book wears on, or not wears on, I shouldn't say, but fires on, that no, they've all got secrets of their own, the protagonists, including Matt, and no one is telling possibly the entire truth. And you'll have to find out read the last page to find out exactly who did it and why.
Oh, amazing. Oh, you've left it to the last page as well. Very Agatha Christie.
Last page, it's on about 4 lines from the end, so yes.
Oh, fantastic. And well, being chair is great for this because it meant that I got to read all three of your books and they all had me on the edge of my seat. So thank you very much. They are all very different books, from the French Alps to the school run to a quiet village. But they also have some very common themes, namely the idea that a seemingly ordinary person can be pushed into this killer mindset and believe there might be no alternative but to go through with the act. but it is really a fine line between playing fair and risking lives. So Simon, my first question is for you. How far can you push your character over that line? And is there a point where you can push them too far? And can you lose the reader if you do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be plausible. I mean, I think all books and all stories in the end have to have a sense of plausibility about them. So clearly, if you tell your character he's got to kill a stranger and he pops around a corner and kills that person, then he's not really, well, he may well be, he's clearly a psycho, he's not an ordinary person. So I think what you've got to try and do, and what I always try to do with my books, is kind of imagine if I'm stuck in this situation, what on earth would I do? And I just tried to sort of take it step by step through what Matt did, and just try to think what I do in that situation. How far could I go? I mean, and go through it like that. And I think, you know, if it's something you feel yourself, then hopefully the readers can identify with what you're trying to say. I mean, that's the only way you can say it. I mean, you lose the readers, I think, if you stretch incredulity. You know, if they just do something that you would think, well, why on earth would you do that? But most people in that kind of situation are going to do things fairly extreme, often with a very, very heavy heart, or they might find that they can't do it. And obviously with Matt, you don't know until it turns out whether or not he can.
Fantastic. And I think one of the things that you do brilliantly with Matt is you build this very tense internal dialogue so that the reader does stay with them throughout the story. But surroundings also play such a huge part in building that mindset and pushing your characters to the edge. Harriet, you really nail this toxic situation in your book, The Lies You Told, when your main character, Sadie, meets some rather competitive and mean mums, as you say. How important is it to build that toxicity into sort of the surroundings of the book to really push your character towards a killer mindset?
Well, I think that if you don't, I mean, it comes back to plausibility, as Simon said, that if you don't have an atmosphere that's sufficiently tense or competitive, then none of the behaviours that come out are going to seem remotely likely. I mean, I have to say that I based a lot of The Lies You Told on 11 years spent at the school gates of primary schools. And while it's an exaggerated version to a certain extent of, I mean, I would hope that no one would go quite as far as some of the characters have. But I think that it can't be underestimated how competitive some people will get in defence or progression of their children's interests, you know, whether it's because they've got their children's interests completely at heart, or whether it's because they're playing out their own psychodrama with their children as their little puppets. I think that really it's crucial that you create a completely all surrounding feeling of oppression and horror before the really bad stuff happens. Otherwise it's just not going to make any sense. And I'm not sure whether I didn't push it slightly too far, because it is just primary school. But on the other hand, people can get very, very strange around their kids.
Yeah, they certainly can. And there were points in the book where I was like, you did not just say that. But at the same time, having been at the school gates myself quite a lot, know that tempers can flare for sure. So yeah, one of the things I really loved about the book was how you really used the peripheral characters to help really build that toxicity with some of those other characters. And Allie, I think you also do that really brilliantly with your book, where you've got this group of highly competitive people who were ex-friends, ex-competitors, who are alone in this ski resort, completely shut off from the world. How much does the isolation that you create in the book play towards pushing that tension and getting your characters really to the edge?
Yeah, I think the isolation plays a big part in that, definitely. I think thriller and crime writers, we're always kind of looking for ways we can isolate and cut off or strand our characters. We don't want them just to be able to pick up the phone and call the police, because, you know, where's the fun in that? So if they are cut off and isolated, you know, there's a sense that anything can happen. They're at the mercy of the elements and each other. Also, if they're in a confined space together, you wonder, are they going to turn on each other when they start fighting for survival? Will they take sides? It might bring out the shadow side of some people, and yeah, they're forced to decide who do they really know, these people that they thought they knew, and how much do they really trust the other people that they're with.
And that really comes across in the book as well when you're reading it, because you're never quite sure who you're trusting and whether they're telling the truth, and if they're lying, what are they lying about? So that's brilliantly dripped through the novel. And secrets and lies plays a huge role in your book, Allie, as it does with all three books. And it really leads the main character into facing impossible situations. It's often these secrets and lies that are at the heart of a character's motivations. But one of the questions that I'm really interested in is what makes the best motivator to really get your character into that killer mindset? So I'm going to ask you that question first, Simon. How do you get your characters to really question how far they're willing to go to get what they want?
Well, I think it boils down to you've got to have something that they have to, they've got to save something about themselves, or get something so huge that it makes it worthwhile. And obviously, in the case of Matt, the main protagonist in Killer Stranger, it's his pregnant fiance. It's his whole life, but it's not just his fiance's life. It's the life of his unborn child. It's the whole life they're going to have together. He is being set up by the kidnapper, so he could, if he goes one way, he can save his fiance, he can save his unborn child, he can have a family, they can move back to Sri Lanka, which is where they're planning to move to, they can have a whole future together. Or he could be blackmailed by a kidnapper, not do what he's told, and end up in prison for the rest of his life for something he hasn't done. So it's you have to, I think, in order to get someone to do something very, very extreme, you have to make sure that they have a huge reward at the end of it, and that's a huge reward. I mean, you know, my ex-wife, you know, was pregnant with 2 of my children. I mean, I would have done anything, pretty much anything, to have saved them at the time. And I think that's what you've got to do. You can't suddenly say, like, you know, you get £50,000 if you kill a guy. I mean, it's got to be something that's life-changing, utterly life-changing. You know, if you don't do it, it's life-changing. If you do it, it's life-changing.
And how far, because in your novel, it's in quite a very short space of time. How important, which is quite a common theme actually in a few of your books, how important is it to really keep that time, that clock ticking, and have it in this really short period of time to really push your characters?
Well, I think in a book, you know, where you have this one big decision to be made, and you have a kidnap, and you have to kill someone in a certain period of time, you've got to... It's hugely important, because really and truly, you couldn't stretch this kind of story out a week. You don't want your main character, you don't want Matt to have too much time to think through what he's doing and think of the possible alternatives and more rational alternatives, which he could take in order to possibly save his fiance, like go to the police or what have you. You want him on the back foot, and then you want the reader to feel like you're in there with him on the back foot, because that obviously drives them to want to read the book, to want to know what happened. So I try to keep the chapters short, the sort of ticking clock always in the background, and just because that just drives everything, the narrative, the plot, the characters forward. And then, you know, every so often sort of chuck in something completely, you know, random that then suddenly changes the whole direction of the book. But that's what it is. I mean, it's all about sort of, yeah, just keeping that tension flowing constantly throughout the story.
Yeah, there's certainly a few gasps in there, that's for sure. My heart was racing throughout the book, so you definitely nailed that. Allie, what about you when it comes to motivation? Would you say that rivalry and jealousy between close friends stirs up the worst in us?
I think, yeah, rivalry and jealousy can definitely be big motivators and make us do things that we shouldn't do. In Shiver, I look particularly at the rivalry between athletes competing in a sport. I think that athletes actually make really good thriller characters, because we know you don't reach the top in a sport by being nice. They need a certain single-mindedness, a ruthlessness. So yeah, I'm surprised we don't see them in thrillers more often, actually. As part of the research, while I was writing, I got researching other sports, and I was listening to interviews of different athletes, and looking at what the really top athletes, some of the things that they've done to get to where they got to. And there were so many stories of mind games and intimidation strategies and just other tactics that they use to get a psychological edge on their rivals in sports like basketball and boxing and golf. So I guess I transported those tactics to an extreme sports environment where we've got, really dangerous, really high stakes. So yeah, the athletes are already doing a dangerous sport, and it's a dangerous environment up on the mountain. So yeah, I think the options for doing something underhand to a rival are quite, endless up there. And also there's often a fine line between what is fair play and what is going too far in a sport. It's quite a grey area a lot of the time. The rules aren't always clear cut. So yeah, I guess Shiva kind of exploits that a little bit.
Amazing. And one of the really interesting things about Shiva is that you've got this sort of dual timeline, then and now situation, where you have this 10-year gap. How did you find keeping that tension going throughout when you have sort of two timelines going?
Well, I was aware that the reader might get, bored or lose interest when they're constantly going back in time. So I tried hard to leave each chapter on a cliffhanger. So they'd be wanting to, know what happens. And when they skip back to the other timeline, they still, they've got an interest in what was happening before. So yeah, it helped me a lot to kind of plan it all out and end on cliffhangers as much as possible.
And you really did do that, because every time I was swapping from chapters, I was like, oh no, I want to go back to the other timeline. So it was very well done.
Thank you.
Moving on to you, Harriet. In The Lies You Told, a parent's desire to get the best for their children plays a big role in the events of the book. As motivation goes, is a mother's love for their child enough on its own to question the price of life, do you think? Or do you need to add that competitive rivalry or another element into it?
Well, I don't think that there's a great deal of love really coming through in The Lies You Told, certainly from some of the characters. I think that their love for their children is entirely eclipsed by their love for themselves and the progression that they see as possible. I've always thought it's slightly tragic when you see people who are vying for positions of power within their children's primary school, because it does rather smack of not having much else going on in your life. And if you watch the shenanigans happening at form reps meetings and parent-teacher associations, it can be really quite stunning the way that people will behave, and it has nothing to do with the children's welfare. And I think that if we're going to look at real life, the examples of what the parents in America have been doing in terms of engineering things for their children to go to colleges, which really don't seem to be places that, are remotely suited to them intellectually or academically. If you're having to cheat the system by sticking someone on a rowing machine, it might suggest that they'd be better off going somewhere else. And it's a tame environment in comparison to kidnapping or the high stakes of the snowboarding. It is quite dull, the school gates in North London. But the way that people can behave and the way that people can play out this sort of proxy warfare in really petty ways, I think is something that I found absolutely fascinating, just in terms of quite how horrible people can be over something that is so, I mean, it's not, your children's education of course isn't trivial, but surely you shouldn't get in that much of a state about it. So it just felt as if it was already a kind of microcosm of horror, and I wanted to play with what you could do with it and how much worse you could make it.
And you certainly do that, and you definitely have this sense of real tension and horror at the school gates. Yeah, I really enjoyed all three of your books, and talking to you today has really amazed me that we're not all bumping off our friends and rivals at the drop of a hat. So I think well done on all of us. If you are watching at home, do follow the link to Waterstones Harrogate, where you can purchase all three of the titles we've been speaking about today. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, which leaves me with the final job of thanking Allie, Harriet and Simon for opening up their minds to us, and to you for watching at home. Thank you and goodbye.
In the music.